Okay, thanks. Bye.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. We're going to call the meeting to order since we have a quorum, and we'll get started. I will do the public comments, and Scott will not be here tonight. So if there's any public comment, please fill out a blue form and send it over to me. We'll get to that in just a minute. Okay. So we'll quickly review the agenda. We'll start out with public comments and the commissioner's comments, and I swear I will not forget the commissioner's comments this time. Then we'll review and approve last month's meeting, and then Lieutenant Mason will come and talk to us about some homeless policies and procedures and how they do things, and then kind of talk through some of the things that are in our package. Then we'll get the chief's report from Captain Klinko that's filling in tonight for him again, which we're happy to have you. Thank you for showing up again.
Thank you.
And then we'll have another review of our cell phone procedure, which we've already had over the last couple months. So we can talk about that again. And then community outreach. We'll see about doing that tonight since Scott's not here, and then any closing comments. Anybody have any additions or anything for the agenda for tonight? With that, we will go to public comments, and I have one, and we'll give you 3 minutes to speak. I'll let you know when 20 seconds are remaining. You can sit right next to Sean over there, and our first one is John Brown.
Okay, if I may hand out both a copy of an ORS and some pictures to help illustrate what my point is. For the record, my name is John Brown. I'm in Ward 5. I've been a resident of Eugene for almost 70 years. I was on original police commissioner. I was on the first 8 years. I spent 8 years around this table, but we did it at the McNutt Room, and we did things like we established the CRB and use of force, crowd control. So I've been very involved in policy making, and I really want to commend all of you for volunteering your time for doing that. I'm here this evening because I've been a clean water advocate for over 30 years, cleaning up camps all around the community, and I'm giving you some pictures of what people will encounter. But almost 90% of the camps I've cleaned up have hypodermic needles in them. And so that tells you that there may be a cause and effect of why they are where they are. And not only does it create a biohazard for however you're going to deal with it, there's also an ORS there, that Oregon Revised Statute, that talks about littering within 100 yards of a public waterway, and a method of how, if people are cited for doing that, where they can work it off. It's a very paltry amount, it's $25 a day, but still, if people are there, you're moving them off, and they don't take what's there, they don't have to get fined, they can clean it up through this already established ORS. But if you look at some of the things in these camps, you'll see one picture, there's nothing but backpacks. We found 40 backpacks that was University of Oregon students in camps that were abandoned down below the Knickerbocker Bridge on the south bank. I found 1,100 hypodermic needles between Island Park and Railroad Bridge, just on one side of the river in Springfield. But I've counted that all over Eugene and all over Springfield. You'll see a small safe, I've seen flat screen TVs, radiators, all sorts of things there. So I've never moved anybody out of a camp, and I think that's very challenging for you because there's some rules about that, but I've cleaned them up. And if you're going to adopt a policy that addresses dealing with this situation, please keep our environment in mind. And say, well, we can't move them. I don't care if they camp 50 yards away from the water, but these are all down on the water. And the very first picture will show you what it's about. So that said, I don't know if that's my gong or not.
No, that's you still have 50 seconds.
It doesn't matter. I never try to take 3 minutes. I think Councilor Ye will tell you that I always, when I come to the podium, it's just one topic, and it's this topic. And I just want you to be recognized that we have wonderful assets in a natural environment. And whatever you do and address, please keep the environment in mind. Morning, afternoon, afternoon. So, anyhow, I'm just talking about your ordinance on camps, and gave you an example of an ORS and some pictures of some of the things I've cleaned up, and I just want you to do that. So thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you for your community service, and good luck in adopting another policy. I've done all mine, so I've done it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. So we don't have any other speakers for this evening? Okay, with that, we'll close the public comments. And we'll move
There,
on
you want one?
to,
Well, I haven't
I
seen it
I took a
yet.
picture of it.
Sure, that's fine.
we'll move on to commissioners' comments. And so, Will, we start with you and work our way around that side of
Well, just thank you to Mr. Brown. I think that was a useful contribution. I share his concerns and don't know what to do about it. That's all.
I don't have anything at this time. Terry?
Well, nothing beyond pictures say a lot, so that's very, well, I don't know if it's surprising or not, but it's certainly a graphic representation of the problems. I would have asked him a lot more questions. Who's carting it away, where are they putting it, who volunteers, all kinds of things, but anyway, it's definitely something to keep in mind.
There might be an opportunity to ask that question when Lieutenant Mason is giving her
Oh,
presentation.
okay, very
So,
good.
I think she
This
might
is
have-
why the city spends about $300,000 a year cleaning stuff up like this.
Steve?
A few comments. Last week, Sylvan and Scott and I interviewed prospective candidates for the police commission. Scott did a really nice job of managing the meeting. There were like 15-minute interviews. I think it would be worth maybe having a kind of a debrief and what could be learned from that process, and perhaps what can be improved from that process. It was a bit. I think there are opportunities for improvement. For example, one of the candidates to be interviewed had a no-contact order because he spit on the incoming police chief during his swearing-in ceremony. Fortunately, he was arrested like a day or two before, so he was a no-show. So I don't know about the filtering process. And some of the ranking, like I didn't feel like there was enough to distinguish between the candidates. There was a highly recommend, or do not recommend, but there were grades of that. Some were more recommendable than others, I would say. So anyway, I just, we got through it and we kind of arrived at some decision points, but I think there's probably an opportunity to improve that process a little bit. My term with the Civilian Review Board is coming up in June. I'm aging out of the process. I'll be leaving you all as well. We're going to have 4 new members on the Civilian Review Board. That's a majority of, there's 7, it's a 7-person board, so that'll be interesting. And the last thing, let's see, no, that's all I had. I wanted to share that there's going to be some new board members at the Civilian Review Board and the interview process, and this is pretty disappointing as well. It'd be nice to find a solution on that. But anyway, that's all I have. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Sean?
I'm really glad that we'll be having the conversation about the camp moving and how that went.
Silver?
Yeah, so it was a difficult process, the one that we came to. Some of the decisions that we came to were hard to come to. So I agree with Steve that we need to look at some of the different rankings and maybe have tiered positions, specifically how they're going to help with the commission, specifically how they're going to help with the community, specifically how they're going to, what qualifications put them in this place. I think just even breaking it out like that would be a wonderful thing to be able to put into the process. Beyond that, no, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Alan?
Yeah, John has been showing us these pictures for a decade. And if there were an easy solution to this, we would have already done it. That's the problem. It's not an easy thing to do. It's a hard thing to police. It's a difficult thing to stop. And thus the problem continues. And like I said, we spend an enormous amount of staff time. That's where the $300,000 comes from, to clean up these things all over the city. And we're working our way towards getting people in housing, which is the solution. But it's a very difficult, time-consuming, and long-term solution to a problem that's in your face. So it's very difficult. Steve, I just want to thank you for your years of service on the CRB, and it's kind of, term limits have downsides, and you're a walking example of that, so thanks. I know who you're talking about on the applications, and actually there is only one filter that staff does on any of the applications, which is whether or not you're inside, you're either a citizen of Eugene or within the UGB of the city of Eugene, and that's the only filter. Otherwise, they don't look at any other kind of, it's up to the counselors to filter that out and the other people to filter that out. And that's very much on purpose. The only thing I would say, I appreciated the work that you guys did in filtering through all those different applicants. It was one of the inputs I used to be able to do my votes. The only thing I would say is that getting it in earlier probably is better. It is better. I tend to do it right at the last minute whenever there's a deadline. That's my deadline. But if some folks were to do it earlier in the process, you might not be able to have them hear your input. So I'd say get it in earlier than you think, maybe 2 weeks before, or as fast as you can. So that's the only thing I'd say about
So that was a mistake, though, because we don't get to vote on that one.
Yeah, I know.
So
It
they can
just
get it
goes
in
to the
whenever.
mayor. Right, we actually got all the ballots, and it's, and police commission is actually the mayor nominates and the council appoints. So we don't work through that process. So you're actually, I guess,
Yeah.
in that case, getting it to the mayor.
Last minute is fine.
Is fine. But thanks for the hard work. I'm sure the mayor will appreciate it. I don't know when she probably has to have her nominations in the
I
same
don't know.
time, I think. So timeliness is important, because they have to notify people.
Yeah, it's about the same time. But she has, she received the letter from Mr. Nowicki last week. The mayor did. So he sent it out almost
He shipped
immediately.
the same day we finished the interviews.
Yeah.
Nice.
So. Anything else?
No. I did, I had this beaten up old American flag that was on a property of mine, and I finally took it down, but I tried to figure out what to do with it, because I haven't been in the military. I know there's a respectful way to dispose of a flag, and I tried the American Legion, I tried the Boy Scouts, I tried everywhere. Finally, I thought of Jeremy, and he said, yeah, bring it to me, and maybe you can explain what you're going to do with it.
So our honor guard has a couple of members that have an annual camping trip where they get together, and they collect a handful of these throughout the year. I don't know that it's an official EPD function, but they like to see that these are burned in a respectful ceremonial way.
Yeah.
And so that's how that's handled. So thank you for bringing that in, and I'll be sure that they get that.
Yeah, thanks for doing that. Yeah, ironically, you burn flags.
I know. First minute.
As a respectful way of doing it. You don't just throw them in the garbage.
Captain Quickly, you have anything you'd like to open up with?
Not necessarily, other than to comment on John's comments, and I think, Terry, it was you who said a picture is worth 1,000 words, right?
Well, thank you everyone for coming tonight. I appreciate it. It's nice to have more than a quorum. So we have some good topics to talk about tonight too. So I'm glad everybody's here for that. So thank you for coming. Remind you, May 22nd is the Police Awards, 3 o'clock in the afternoon at the Valley River Inn.
Yes.
I'm sure I said all that right. So good to have it on your calendar. It's a great event to see some of the great work that the department's doing, and also there's some citizens that usually get some awards that have done some great things too. So good to go. Okay, with that, we'll review and approve the minutes from last month. Anybody have any comments, corrections, questions?
Move approval?
Second.
Okay, any other discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Motion passes. So with that, we'll move into our first topic, and I will welcome Lieutenant Mason to the table. And so just, Jeremy, I think, did a great job in his memo setting up our discussion tonight. But I do want to remind everybody that, like we talked about at the last meeting, we want to focus this on things that pertain to the department, policies that maybe the department, as Jeremy had included in our packet, were a couple of them that we could look at and maybe talk a little bit tonight. But we're not here to solve the homeless problem. We're not here to do that. I know, sorry, Lieutenant, I know that's what you're hoping for. But really, it's to focus on, the things that the department is doing, that maybe policies we want to look at, or processes that they're doing to look at, just so that we can understand them better, and also maybe make recommendations if there's something that needs to be done with that. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Lieutenant Mason. Thank you for coming.
Welcome. Thanks for inviting me. Well, I read the summary of information you're looking for, but I guess I'm kind of wondering where you want me to start, because it's a deep subject.
So what we'd like you to start with, and I think how your name came up is when we start talking about, you can thank him for that later. So when we talked about the things that the department has to handle, and it came up the incident that was over at the Whole Foods. And so that, I think, is a place to start to how the department handles when a camp is reported to them, and what the steps they do to take in that, and if there's certain policies, and then we could sort of maybe kind of talk a little bit then as we move through that discussion to maybe car camping, which is what that contract and that piece that we put in here, because I think it kind of ties together, because both are things that the department is looked at to do, but they're always, it's not looked at. I guess you're getting blamed for things that you are just trying to do to the best of your ability under certain rules that you're following.
Okay.
And that's what we're trying to get at with this discussion. Al?
Yeah, I was thinking that the Whole Foods using that as an example of how you implement the policy.
We didn't implement the policy in that example. But, so how we get complaints is obviously the complaint comes in through our non-emergency number, and frankly, right now, what I'm having them do, because we get so many of them every day, is they close them out and they send them to me the following day. They're anywhere between 0 on Sundays usually to maybe up to 10 per day for illegal camping on the public right-of-way. So if they're camping on private property, that's a trespass issue that'll get dispatched. If it's a right-of-way issue, tent camping on a public right-of-way, then we don't have staffing to send officers to that. There's just no way. They're a priority 5. They would sit on the call screen until the end of time, frankly. So what I did is I have dispatch close them, supervisor closes them with a special disposition code. They get sent to me every day through an automated report, and then I keep them on this nice little spreadsheet. And I have 2 sergeants on either end of the week, and a handful of officers that we go out and follow up on the camps to see if A, they're still there in fact, and B, what resources, we've got to verify the property ownership jurisdiction-wise, and what resources we have at our disposal to affect them. That's been pretty successful. Frankly, the majority of the complaints resolve themselves by the time we get out within a day or 2. Most of these people are generally packing up and moving to another site to get another complaint before we get there. The majority of them have been pretty compliant with moving along when we ask them to. Now, when we get to a situation where we get multiple complaints and they're not compliant with, hey, can you cease camping, you need to leave, go somewhere else, then we have to revert to the policy. So that's the camping on public property policy. And this particular policy, I think, frankly, it poses some challenges for us. Actually, before I even knew about this meeting, I've been working with our city attorney to kind of revise it to make it a little more usable for us, and I'll talk about that later. But what our process is, is to contact the campers, provide a warning, like I explained, hopefully gain compliance from them. And at that time, per the policy, we're supposed to give them a notice in English and Spanish. And that's the posting, so we either post it in the ground, or we can hand it to the violator in person. And then if we return in 24 hours and they're still present, then we can cite them for prohibited camping. So the A, B, C, D in section 4, they're camping on public property, is if they're present, warn them, give them the notice, post it, hand it to them. We're supposed to notify the agency listed on the posting of the campsite's location, and that's usually, the listing includes St. Vincent de Paul, Catholic Community Services, and Whitebird Homeless Team, or it's their homelessness program. That's frankly what's been challenging to us, because none of those organizations, we don't have a contact per se, and we don't they don't respond out to the location to try to offer services or find placement for people. That's not what they do. So that was one of the challenges. What we had been doing is we contact Cahoots and notify them that we've given citations or we've posted the area, and these people are either willing to have services from Cahoots to offer resources, or they're not. So that's kind of how we're getting around the notifying the social service agency. And then we obtain a case number and prepare a report. So there's a couple of circumstances where the 24-hour notice doesn't apply, which is specific here, which means that we can issue a citation immediately if any of these exceptions are in place. So other illegal activities, if we can arrest or cite for another illegal activity, we can, and I encourage that we do that because it resolves the problem usually at that time. We can also cite for the prohibited camping along with that at that time. An emergency such as a threat to human life or safety, and frankly haven't encountered any of those in this year's camping, but in years past when I was the camping coordinator back during Sleeps and Occupy, we did close several properties because of health concerns, and as well as the location and the traffic pattern being a safety hazard to those campers. And also, anytime the location is posted with a prohibited camping sign. There's a few of those sites around town. There's one currently at 3rd and Adams. We're across from Territorial Winery. It's next to a porta potty. Again, it allows us to issue a citation immediately. So the hiccup for all of this is that we can issue a citation for prohibited camping. It's a violation. It is a $150 bail or fine, and it is an optional appearance in court. So what that means is that I give a piece of paper to a homeless person who has probably no means to pay it and most likely will not show up in court. And at that point, if they fail to appear or take care of the citation, it goes to collections. So it really is kind of a waste of time for us in a sense, because there's no end game for it. And frankly, a lot of these folks now know that. One particular subject at 5 and High now has 22, I gave him one the other day, 22 citations since September.
So, Lieutenant, I guess that's my question. I put myself first in the queue because
You have that prerogative.
So I guess that's sort of as we talk about that. So, giving somebody a citation, does it actually make them move? Does it actually? And I guess that's where I'm.
No, it's kind of a double-edged sword because, sometimes the threat of a citation without the knowledge of the end game for these people will encourage them to depart. But eventually the word gets out, and like others, they just, thank you for my ticket, have a nice day, and they stay. On one hand, that's the only tool that we have to enforce the prohibited camping, as ineffective as it is, and it's something that we need to do to say that we are doing all that we have to do in our power, but, kind of, at what point is it purposeless? 22 citations, and, I talked to Whitaker Community Council last night, and it was, they kind of brought it up too. It's like, if these people ever want to get out of the hole that they're in, and they changed their lives, they're now encumbered with this nightmare of their past, which, you know, they have abilities to make decisions, but
I thought I turned that off.
But, so yeah, that's a dilemma. It's like, at what
Go to
point
church.
is it purposeful to continue giving citations? I don't have the answer, because I don't, frankly, my opinion, having done this, I write probably half the citations for prohibited camping myself, and I don't see any result from it.
Go ahead, Steve.
Well, a couple questions. How do places get designated as prohibited camping? You said there are...
The locations,
Yes.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
So I'm not 100% certain on it, but I have talked to Public Works about, you know, having other sites posted, I should say, I haven't talked to Public Works specifically, I've talked to other people who have knowledge of it, and they said that you have to go through Public Works and maybe traffic engineering. That's at least how you deal with the commercial parking zones and the no parking, no overnight parking. They're able to put those signs up. I know in the past when we closed properties and put the no trespassing or the prohibited camping, it was city facilities that did that.
And the tickets are like words out, so it's an ineffective tool. And it places a burden on somebody who may be able to improve their circumstance and now they have this debt hanging over their head, right? Do you have some thoughts on what tools that we might want to consider that would be more helpful for you?
I've been asking, I think it's actually kind of on the table right now at the city manager's level, but extending the property rights or the trespass rights to the public right-of-way in front of the homeowner's residence or business residence. Because currently, if you've seen the campers, that's typically where they are. They're in front of somebody's home in the curb strip. So from the sidewalk to the street, there's usually a grassy patch. That is public right-of-way. But yet the homeowner or the property owner is responsible for maintaining it. And currently, it is public property. So they cannot say, even though it's right in front of their house, that they don't want, they can say they don't want somebody there, but we don't have any ability to move them. So I believe that the folks are looking at trying to enact that, whether or not that's a feasible piece. That would really amount to, it would change the drive of our calls for service, because it would go from a prohibited camping to a criminal trespass. And I'm, you know, again, it would be arresting or trying to cite people in an effort to resolve the problem, and it's really not going to resolve the problem, because people want to have to change, and we have to have a place to put them or services to offer them. So that's one thing I can think of that would be really beneficial if they want the police to be able to enact change.
And then the last thing about these tickets, I guess they're violations and they're not some sort of a misdemeanor. They don't have a more penalty than a fine. Is that right?
Yeah, and, you know, and that was one thing that I asked whether or not we could consider, was whether or not at some point, you know, after a certain number of citations, it could go, they could change it and they could go to warrant, or it could become an arrestable offense. And there's some concern about, you know, the criminality of arresting people for homelessness or prohibited camping. So that I don't know that that's really going to be a viable option.
Okay.
I have Terry and then Alan and Hugh.
I was just wondering when, if you're able to get that changed, the criminal trespass, I mean, so that it would be a criminal trespass.
Right.
Would that go to community court, or would that be, you know,
So
I'm just wondering how it would handle, because of how that it would be handled, because if we have a stick and a carrot, in other words, if you can prove to us that now you have a place to stay, then that wipes out all of these tickets.
Right.
That wipes out all of these criminal, whatever you had before,
Yeah, I
criminal
like
trespass,
that
the other.
there's some
Yeah.
other resolution besides a criminal offense. but
Right.
Anything, my understanding for the community court is that the area designated for that is still the downtown zone with some expanded boundaries. So
I see.
the vast majority of the illegal camping calls are outside of the downtown zone,
Right.
because they do have the enhanced penalties, which allow arrest on a lot of different ways. But I like that idea,
But
if we
so-
could
yeah,
expand the
some-
community court.
Right,
for
or
certain
something
offenses,
similar,
yeah.
you know, whichever court they need to, well, they're not gonna show up. But
They
if
might,
they
if-
might,
with encouragement, yeah.
if they knew that there was a reason to do that we perhaps could waive some of their previous
Right.
issues if they can prove, and this is along with getting help, assistance to find housing, all of that, you know, that would have to be the first piece.
Yeah.
But the second piece is once you prove that, then you've cleared yourself.
Yeah, I like that.
I have Alan, then Silver.
Yeah, a couple of points. One is that it's a citation. It's not a misdemeanor, so it's not a crime. It's more along the lines of running a stop sign. So if those people are criminals, then I guess you could call it criminalization. But technically, it's not criminalization. But that's kind of here or there because in the Pearl area in my ward, where that issue has come up more recently, it's kind of quieted down a bit, but people were camping in the right-of-way, and the businesses who owned those properties had no right to deal with folks right in front of their house or right in front of their business, and they were very upset. And the cops would come and give them a citation, and they'd say, thanks for the citation. They'd either stay there or leave or come back, and then come back. And then, so the system where the citations just build up doesn't really have any impact. And then turning it into, if you get more than 10, then it becomes a crime. What good does that do? That doesn't change anything either, because those people, we're not going to put them in jail, and they're not going to be able to pay the fine. So that's just all semantics at that point. So there's two solutions. One is the community court solution, but that's only in the downtown area, and mostly, roughly, and then and building more shelters and more housing, and getting people out of homelessness. And that's where the whole TAC report comes in, and the whole effort to create more housing for folks, and getting them into some kind of shelter is really the end game. I mean, the reason John Brown's been bringing us these things for 10 years is exactly the same reason. Can't do anything about it. It just keeps happening, and you can. You're not going to arrest these people. You're not going to, if you give them a citation for this, so what? Well, they can't pay it anyway. It's a very vicious circle with not a good solution, which is why it's been a problem for so long. I've been doing this for 25 years, and they haven't come up with something. Nobody's come up with a really good idea. Have you heard any better ideas?
No.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one. It's really hard. But the real issue is getting people out of homelessness into homes and shelters.
I think one of the bigger differences between, say, 5 years ago and now is that I don't know that the numbers have changed. We haven't got this year's point in time count yet, but before they were more secluded and kind of hidden. Now they're just in your face. They're everywhere, and they're blatant about it. And I don't know if that's purposeful or otherwise, but, you know, they're so much more visible that it's, you know, more obvious and getting more attention.
I have Silver, Sean, and then Will.
So I'm the one who suggested that we have the police department stop issuing citations, and that was a suggestion that I made that the department could send to the council. I don't think it's a matter of being more in your face, because I've seen homelessness from families, people that are living in their cars, people that are transient because they're moving from place to place, people that are not able to live, you know, on their own anymore, so they're moving in with family members. It's an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
it's
don't disagree.
Yeah. The reason I bring up the citations was Whole Foods. So we basically all know that was a protest.
Mm-hmm.
After the citation was issued, Eric went to the city council and said, "Where's my stuff? You all took my stuff, you threw away my stuff." in this case, you know, I understand his purpose for being there. And I understand that the citation and the subsequent, like, conversations that he brought to the council were to raise awareness. But by and large, the citations are not gonna help, and we've said this at the table today. Being a person who's personally been affected by homelessness, having that additional thing hovering over your head is not in any way gonna benefit you trying to pull yourself out of that situation. So, I agree with Alan, it's something that the council and the city's been trying to deal with for some time, but I think we're doing it in the wrong way. And I think we should look at different perspectives and different ways that we can approach the situation, and not moving in the direction of criminalizing it more by making it an easier option to give a citation or to arrest someone for that situation. Personally, every Friday after the City Club event, I bring the leftover sandwiches to Whitebird. They're super, super appreciative. And I see, cold, rainy days, there's not as many people out. Warm days, they're there. And I see the effect that it has in the area. So maybe the issue is, you know, the location. And maybe Whitebird being there, specifically Whitebird in that area. Maybe the resources that the city's putting into the homeless issue could be given to Whitebird to move to a better location, so that those resources would be somewhere more in line with having a homeless population hanging outside, because they're there for a reason, and that's the resources that they can utilize at Whitebird. That's just a thought. But if they're going to be at specific areas, it's for specific reasons, and we need to understand why those reasons exist and kind of go along with that.
Just to touch briefly on what you said, I'm happy to talk about the Whole Foods thing. I kind of got sidetracked. I was there. And also, we don't get a lot of calls for service related to illegal camping or anything of that nature related to Whitebird in the Midtown area. We get disputes and drinking and, you know, quality of life issues.
I do.
But I mean, very rarely do we get any camping complaints in the Midtown, even the West U area, and they resolve fairly quickly. I tell you right now, the hot spot is the winter. So, just to touch on that one.
Yeah.
And they are moving.
Yeah.
They're gonna move the crisis services over on the 7th. I just talked to them yesterday.
Great.
Oh, Whitebird is?
Yeah. It might be a while. They bought both the house they're in now and they bought the adjacent one they're trying to remodel. So, anyway, not my story.
Then I have Sean and Bill.
Actually, yeah, to touch on a couple of things before we get to my questions. I live right behind Whitebird, and I hear from property managers who, some of which are my clients, that there is no hope that anything will change there, which is why you're probably not getting any calls for complaints.
Probably.
And then on the other side of that, my personally, I love it because my rent is cheaper.
If you're willing to live with it.
Yeah, and you know, this is getting a little bit on a soapbox, but like, if you treat them like people, they tend not to be terribly rude to you, at least not to me. Though, the second thing, I forgot. Marty Wilde's building is the one they bought over on 7th, ex-commissioner. And then the actual question I had was that you said during your testimony that we can't give out the way I heard it was we can't give out these no camping notices if we don't list a local agency that delivers social services. And you're currently going to Cahoots as that agency. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how and whether they actually can deliver these services?
I can't speak for Cahoots, or I just know that, so what I understand with the policy when I talked to Ben Miller was that The specific language related to this notification aspect is related to the state law. I don't remember the ORS off the top of my head. And it's related to when police remove people from property. So this was, 2014 is the timeline on our policy. And that was roughly the time frame when we were dealing with Occupies. Occupy was over, we were into the sleeps movement here. And so we were closing properties and removing them from those properties in order to get the camps closed because of health hazards and safety concerns. And so this policy is built on that. It's not built in the premise of how we are working today, in that we aren't removing people from property. We can't tell them they have to leave a property. We can only ask them to cease camping and inform that if they continue camping, they can be issued a citation. So with that, Ben has said, and I'm working on a policy change now, which is great to bring to you guys, that I'm going to leave this section, I'm going to retitle it, when removing people from property due to closing, and I'm going to make another section that talks about when you are going to cite somebody for prohibited camping. There is no state ordinance, state law that requires a notification to anybody or a handout or a notice. So currently, within the last 4 weeks, we've been operating under that without changing the policy at my direction, having talked to Ben Miller, our Assistant City Attorney. Does that get to the?
I think so.
Well, you were asking about the.
Yeah, the way I read.
Can Cahoots provide the service?
410.4B is you can talk to them, tell them to cease camping or be subject to a prohibited camping citation.
Right.
And that notice has to have a local agency that delivers social services included in that notice. But you also mentioned when you
We're notifying Cahoots.
Yeah, that you're telling Cahoots about it, but if they can't actually keep up with the volume or demand, this just seems to be in conflict with itself.
It is, and that's why I want to change the policy. Cahoots can offer the resource service and saying, what is available, Camp 99, the different venues that they know about, and they can actually provide transportation if somebody's willing to go. So we felt that that was a viable solution for a notification. Because if I call Catholic Community Services, they're going to say thanks, and they don't send people out. They never did send people out, even when we were closing sites. But we had to do something. And it was also based on Portland's issues where they had more resources. They have outreach services. We don't have that, which would be an advantage if we did. We had caseworkers that actually went out into the field, much like our court team, and it was expanded across the city. That could be very beneficial.
That answers my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I have Will, and I put myself in the queue, and then Alan and Steve. Will?
A lot of times in life, my job is to say the obvious, but and so I'll do that. It's obvious that there really is a terrific occupancy problem in Eugene. There's no housing available, especially at the lower economic ranges, granted. But nobody has mentioned drugs at all. And I'm inclined to think that drugs are at the heart of a lot, not all, but a lot of the homelessness problem. And it's questionable in my mind as to what happens if you put someone who's heavily addicted to some drug into some shelter. I mean, I'm inclined to think, so what? I mean, I don't think it's much of a solution for that person. I wonder if everybody has seen that Seattle is Dying video. It's on
I watched
YouTube.
half of it.
It's on YouTube. Oh, the best
I
part
haven't
is
got to the solution yet.
Got to go to the end. Well, the solution has nothing to do with Seattle. It's a reference to a program in Rhode Island, actually Providence, Rhode Island, where they've done a terrific job of taking individuals that are in trouble on the street and putting them into a significant rehab program that has a remarkably high rate of success, like 85% or something. And they really pour the services on them and in many cases make it work. And there's a little clip right at the end of that video where they show the McNeil Island federal pen, which is empty now. And the implicit suggestion is, come on, Seattle, why don't you do something like Rhode Island has in a facility like that? Anyway, all I want to mention is, don't forget that the dark note underlying a lot of this stuff is drug abuse.
And mental illness.
Yeah. That's
Okay, so I have myself, Alan, Stephen, and Sean. So first I'll start out with, I want to make sure that I keep everybody focused that this is not a discussion about how we're going to fix homelessness. That I do not want to have that discussion. What I want to talk about is, and where I'm going to try to ask, the next question I'm going to ask is that, I understand the citations don't work, but what do we tell the citizens of Eugene that don't want to have to deal with this in front of their house, or they don't want to have to go to the park with their kids and not be able to take them down closer to the river or take them through, the wooded area because they don't know what they're going to find in there. So, and that's where I think, we talk about not doing citations and things like that, but I think that's where the department gets its complaints from, because that's who's calling and saying, I want to be able to do this, but I can't because of this. And so how does that sort of fit within how we do this policy, or how, when we, I know it's a question that I don't know we can answer tonight, but I think that's what sort of, how does that, because it came up with the car camping. That's how we started the car camping last time, is we had some public comment that came in, and I think we had 3 of them that came in, and one young woman said, every day I live alone, I get up, and this motorhome is in front of my house. They know when I come. They know when I'm not there. They know everything I do, and I don't ever see them, but I know they're there. And so it's very scary for somebody like that. But she had called, and we went through our program, but they never could get them to move because our program requires them to talk to them and stuff. So those are the things I think that we need to think about in this discussion, is that how do we either come out with more information, maybe there isn't a solution for the department in this, but maybe there's more information that we're limited to do these kind of things. These things need to be, but and the expectations are then set. But.
So my day starts at 7 and my phone is lit up with phone calls, just like you talk about, people calling me because dispatch gives them my phone number. And they express their fear and concern about either the homeless people camped in front of their house in their neighborhood, or the motorhome that's parked in front of their house. And they're concerned about their safety and the livability, and I'm the one that gets to answer that call and explain to them, what I can and can't do. And most of them go fairly well, once they kind of understand. But it always starts off with, why aren't you arresting these people? And I have to go through exactly what I'm doing here with you, talking about, I can give them a citation, but I can't make them leave, I can't arrest them, and I can't take their property, that it's public property that they're on. And they leave satisfied with the answer, but not satisfied with the result, if you will. And I feel frustrated because I think there's a misconception by the public, where the public, I think, generally believes that the police are ignoring the problem and not doing anything about it. And that's far from the truth, in my opinion. We just don't have the tools, or I don't even want to say the tools. It's beyond our control, really. And how to say that politically correct to people is difficult and challenging sometimes, because they often ask, well, if you aren't able to resolve the problem, who do I go to? And I'm not one to throw anybody under the bus, but I'm like, the laws are enacted by your elected officials, and
It's okay, you can do it, it's fine.
I don't want to
We
do that,
signed
but
up for that.
it's really where it's at. It's like I can come out and I can ask someone to leave, and I can plead with them that they're scaring the neighbors, and I can talk to the neighbors about not, homeless people by their nature aren't necessarily scary. And like you said, you talk to a few of them, you get to know them, and you're like, oh, okay. Whitaker, that's a mixed bag for sure over there. I've got people that say, I want this guy's motorhome in front because I know him and he's great. He doesn't let the riffraff come around, and I would rather have him parked in front of my house instead of the other ones that show up tearing up the bicycles all night. And I know this guy, I want him to camp here. And then others that say, I don't want any of them. So I don't think we're ever going to find a solution, but how we get more information out to the public about what, I guess, police or the community can and can't do by the laws that are in place. You know, we have a couple of Ninth Circuit cases that limit our abilities to act. So,
yeah, and not to take over this, but I think, you know, maybe that, you know, that's a direction that we need to think about as a commission, is this more of an informational piece that needs to be, that we need to, you know, understand and get public, you know, that this is the policy, this is the law, this is the, you know, there's only limited things. Your police department isn't your answer here.
right.
There's other things, but we can continue down that path, but that's just.
Yeah, I've already reached out to the captain as well as our PIO to talk about, let's put something together in a, you know, condensed version and get it out to the media to share that perspective, and not to send everybody to council and everything, but, you know, to help them understand what the situation is and what the limitations are. But we haven't quite gotten there. We keep missing each other during the week, but, you know.
Thank you. So I have Alan, Stephen, and Sean.
Yeah, I would like to hear your take on the Whole Foods thing, but one of the things about, other things I would like to hear about is the process and the rules about how we deal with people's properties if they do get moved or arrested. In the case of Eric Jackson, my understanding from emails from the chief is that the particular item that he said was taken by the police was his father's jacket that was very important to him since his father's passed on, and it turned out that he had the jacket, so it didn't end up being correct, although the rumors flew around on email like everybody was there, and none of them were, and it turned out Eric had the jacket anyway. But so maybe you can talk about what happens when we take people's belongings in the Ninth Circuit courts around that, and also what happened at the Whole Foods thing.
Sure. So I came in late to the Whole Foods incident. You know, it started off being over at the Butterfly, and then it moved over to the Free Speech Plaza, and eventually he moved from that site with a couple other folks over to Whole Foods. We received a volume of complaints, a lot from Whole Foods themselves, and I know that Julie Smith, the downtown sergeant, and her team had been keeping an eye on it because it's in their area, so it was really kind of their show to run. But on that particular Friday night, Julie and I had met because I was the watch commander, and she had talked about some couple of laws that we might be able to enforce upon those guys there. I know that I believe the downtown team had cited them a number of times and asked for compliance and got nothing. And Friday night, she showed me some photographs of the tents and some of their possessions hanging out into the roadway, obstructing the bus stop area, and also the trash and the human feces that was in the planters, creating a health hazard. So she told me that Saturday morning, if in fact that was still in place, then they intended to make an arrest based on, I think it was interfering with public transportation, because the tent and the structure, I think the platform that it was on, was actually extending slightly out into the roadway, but still constituting the offense. So that morning we went over, we confirmed that in fact was still in place, that the tarps and stuff were actually hanging out into the roadway. And so I met with Julie and their downtown team and a couple of CSOs, and we made the arrest of the people that were still there. I think 2, maybe 3. Eric was one of them, and then one other male and possibly another, I don't remember for certain. All of it was on body-worn camera. I made sure that they videoed and documented everything, and I also instructed them that.
Can I just intercede just real briefly? This is still an ongoing case, so I think we need to make sure we keep our discussion about it at somewhat of a high level.
Right. So anyway, the rest were made. I'd let them know to make sure to document all the property because I was concerned that there was going to be the complaint of missing or lost property. Our policy with anytime we take a person into custody is that we have to take all of their property and lodge it at ECU. And our practices in lodging property does, I don't have the book here and I haven't lodged property myself for a long time, but it's really a stringent process. So any perishable food items or combustibles, those have to be disposed of. I'm guessing that if there was something of significant value, we'd probably find a way to do that. You know, maybe if they had a $500 ham hock or something. And then everything that is taken has to be documented on the evidence form and provided to that person. If there are contaminated items, we don't keep those. And in this case, I can say with certainty that there was a number of contaminated items within Mr. Jackson's property. And I was not there to see how everything was handled personally.
Contaminated meat.
It had feces or urine on it.
Urine and all kinds of stuff.
That is in the chief's memo that's in
Right.
our packet. He talks about the items that they
Right.
consider to contaminate.
So to my knowledge, those items were destroyed and they were placed in our secure dumpster and that was all documented. So everything that was of an appropriate nature was lodged in our facility. And Mr. Jackson was provided with the evidence property sheet. When he was released, he went over to claim his property. So that's kind of the nutshell. Maybe I overshared.
No, that's fine. And, you know, if I could add on to that, I know Mr. Jackson very well. I have his number in my phone, and every time I go to Facebook, he is a suggestion for me for a friend. So I go and visit with him at least once a week. That particular morning, after he got out of jail, I met him over. When we interdict people in a park and open space, Parks and Open Space actually comes and they call it a big burrito. They take their tent and their belongings, absent anything of significant value or biohazard. They fold it up like a giant taco and they take it out to Garfield right next to Opportunity Village. They have a structure there. They provide information with the individual on how they can acquire, and they hold it for 60
I think
days,
60
is my
days,
belief.
yeah.
So that's where Eric thought he was going to go to get his property. I got him over to our evidence control unit, which is just right next door there. We were able to get the items that he wanted. There were a few things that he didn't want, and he said, no, don't worry about that. He was initially very concerned. There were some things he thought that were missing. As he later went through his items, his father's jacket was one of those. He located that particular item and some other items that he initially thought maybe were gone. I literally drove him over to Public Works into the back where there's a dumpster because he's like, I want, I don't care. If you guys threw my tents away, I want them. So we made an effort. I took him over there. Hey, Eric, we can find them. We can find them. Those dumpsters have been emptied. So, we made some effort to try and recover his property. I understand why it can't be lodged in our facility because of the biohazard nature of it. I guess I'll end by saying he was able to recover the vast majority of his items. Primarily what he couldn't get were some tents and quite a bit of disrepair that had biohazard. I expect my officers to treat people's property with respect, under our current policies and state law, but I can't lodge things that in our estimation are contaminated. And that's where we have a risk claim process and procedure. If somebody believes that items were inappropriately discarded, they can make a claim and go through that process.
The other question I had was related to parks. I noticed that we've got a lot of parks are closed from 10 to or 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. signs and no camping on them. And parks seem to be treated differently because of that.
Right, parks have park rules, and I don't deal with parks. But if you have a specific question, I might be able to address them.
I never see anybody camping in parks. Is that because they're removed because of the park rules?
Some of them are closed. I mean, some parks actually have a physical gate that gets closed, which prevents that. We do get complaints about camping in parks, but a lot of times, by the time the park officers come on at 7, it's 6, and now they can't enforce because they didn't observe them in the park during the closed hours. I know the guys are kind of working on a plan there to maybe to be able to come in early and address it. And I also know that I think Alton Baker and the Science Factory, the permitted spaces, which kind of attract some other campers to kind of fill in the gaps overnight, or I believe I was told they're going to be closed down at the end of this month, which will allow Alton Baker to be the gate actually closed, which would prevent people from camping overnight.
Now, that pertains to vehicles, right? But if you're
Right.
talking other, so I think one reason you maybe think we don't have as many people camping in parks is A, because there tends to be more foliage and they can kind of be more secluded. They might be down along the river,
Riverfront.
as an example, such as this. But parks spends a lot of time going through. We have 2 officers dedicated to working with parks, so they work very closely with them to get people to move. And that's an example of where, when parks will take property, if there's nobody present, they take that property, they make that big taco, they take it to that storage facility, and then they post it saying, you know, on such and such date and time, we came by, we remove your property, it's at this location, you have until this date to come claim it. The other thing is that if you violate park and open space rules, and there's a whole litany of rules, prohibited camping is one of them, alcohol, glass containers, et cetera, it is punishable by citation, or potentially it's jailable. So there are more teeth to enforcing rules in parks than they are. The same activity in public property that is not in a park has fewer teeth that can be applied in terms of enforcement. And our goal is never to arrest these individuals. Sometimes, if they know they can be arrested, it encourages them to move along. When we get in a situation where they're just going to receive a citation potentially, they know there really aren't repercussions to that. So just the difference in the ability to have an enforcement action can make a difference in whether people comply or not.
So I have Steve and then Sean.
Mindful of the admonishment not to try and solve the unhoused issue at this table. Appreciate that, but also mindful that the numbers reduced and it helps the pressure on us. And hearing some of the comments like, Alan, 25 years we've kind of been working on this. I read an article in the New York Times that I wanted to share with you guys, and I'm happy to email it, but it was an opinion by David Brooks called "Winning the War on Poverty." The Canadians are doing it, we're not. We have to start somewhere. And they started 15 years ago, just to highlight, 15 years ago. And this program now, they start with 6 cities. Now they have 72 regional networks covering 344 towns. And they've had a substantial reduction. And it takes time. It's not something that happens overnight, but you have to do something. It's like an iceberg. It's big, it's slow, it's heavy. And once you start turning it, it will turn. So probably a longer term view with the program small that you can grow. And this might be really something worthy of reviewing, because that helps us all. It helps the population, it helps the community, it helps us. So I just was throwing it out there, and I'm happy to share that with everybody. It's a great article.
Yeah, that'd be good to read. Sean?
It seems to me as though, as in so many things, we want to have our cake and eat it too. That in a lot of cases seems to lead to lukewarm tea. On the one hand, we could throw our hands up and say, we can't do anything about this. No citations, and we're not even going to respond when the public comes out and complains, says that there's somebody camping in front of their house. On the other hand, we could go way more draconian and do what so many activists already feel and engage in, more robust policies with teeth. And I think on both sides, there's always going to be people who are really unhappy with that. So speaking from a public information perspective, and being on the forefront of PR to inform the entire community, I think, also requires an amount of investment that I don't know if we currently have. So, to me, the question is, how can we, as a police commission, facilitate that?
Silver?
So the original question was, what can we as a police commission do to make a suggestion, correct? And along the lines of how can we help? Am I right in that?
The department.
How could the department help?
Or no, how could we help the department structure how they're handling some of this through policies or through practices that we have say in, I guess is the way to say that.
And so my original suggestion was that we don't give citations. That's something that we can do that would, I think, help some of the burden of some of the people that are like receiving these citations that in some cases it doesn't sound like they don't deserve. Some cases it sounds like they really do deserve it. But by and large, I think the officers approaching these campsites, asking for someone to move, and then coming back and helping along, to find another space or to go wherever they need to go. It sounds like, to me, by and large, that benefits and that helps, that they move, from what I understand.
Sometimes.
Okay.
There's 2 places they're not moving anymore.
Okay. So, we're not making a suggestion to do anything else other than, for me personally, I feel that we should start saying, this isn't working. We should look at it from a different perspective. And when it does require somebody to get a citation, then that's valid. But by and large, it doesn't help. And so I don't feel as though the department is getting any benefit from issuing the citations. Personally, I've seen my own family receive help from one of these programs. It's called Step Up on 2nd Street. It's in Los Angeles, California. My mother was a drug addict for 20 plus years, living on the streets, and one day was approached by one of these organizations, and they said, we're going to give you a place to stay. We're going to ask for you to go to these meetings. We'll help you get your social security. We'll set you up. Now I have contact with my mother. We're not doing something like that. That benefits somebody, especially somebody who's 60 years old and wants to get their lives together. But I've seen what happens with my mother being in a situation where she received tickets for living in a campsite, for living in the fields, and personally, I know from her personal experience that it doesn't help. It just puts a burden, and it feels like even more of a weight is coming down on you. So I want to finish with my suggestion that we offer as a commission to say that we should move away from issuing citations for those people that are homeless and obviously sometimes doing it for a protest. By and large, just homeless and not able to find a place to stay because of drug addiction issues, alcohol issues, or mental illness issues. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. No, I'll have to try to figure out, we'll talk to Sergeant Williams and figure out what, if there's a policy to bring back to talk about that in more detail, because I'm not sure where that falls in, but we'll look at that. Okay. So, did you have something?
Will had his hand up.
Did you have a hand up?
I hesitate because I feel that I'm alone here. But
We don't take public
But,
comment.
I think the suggestion is impossible or ought to be impossible. And I say that not from the, I understand, I think, your point, but from the point of view of a community, a law has to be applied equitably. You cannot single out a particular segment of the community and say, let's just don't apply the law there. If we could do that, I'd have suggestions that would benefit me. Yeah. But you can't do it that way. I suppose, not as a commission. You sure can't do it as a recommendation from something like a police commission. That's all I need to say, I guess.
Alan, Sean?
Yeah, my question for the lieutenant is, how do you apply that? When do you issue a citation and when do you don't?
Yeah.
Good question, because I just wrote that. We would really like to have some guidance on when we should and when we shouldn't.
Yeah.
It's a discretion of the officer. And, you can hear a story from one person who's in tears about where do I go, what do I do, yada, yada, yada. And then you hear the other one that just gives you the finger, It's like you can't make a decision based on, how they react to you.
Right.
I posed the question to my captain going, so do we give them 2 warnings before we give them a ticket? Do we have to have human waste and trash piled all around before we do a ticket? Do we have to get 5 complaints from the neighborhood? I mean, or does everybody get one the first time? Because how do you base it on fairness, I mean, do I give the downtown people a ticket every day and not the people over in the Whitaker a ticket every day?
So,
And I say that hypothetically, but we would really like some direction too. Because ultimately it's left to us to decide, and then there's the arbitrary discussion about, well, and I answer these questions, you're not enforcing the law the same way in the Ferry Street Bridge area. There's no camps up there. You are doing something different than what you're doing down here in the Whitaker. I'm like, well, I'm not. They're not going up there for whatever reason. But there's that perception.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I could dovetail onto that. First and foremost, there is discretion. There is a certain amount of discretion that an officer has. But one of the big differences is an officer driving by and seeing a camp, or is it complaint driven? We are much more responsive to complaints, obviously, because it's somebody in the community who's saying, hey, there's an ordinance on the books. It's being violated. I expect my police department to do something to enforce that ordinance. I think the other thing is the individual. We would much rather gain compliance. Make the person aware that, okay, there is an ordinance that prohibits this. I think one of the most heartbreaking things as an officer is to have someone say, well, then where can I go? And we don't have a lot of good answers. We have some suggestions, but as the lieutenant alluded to, we know that there isn't the capacity to help everybody. And honestly, some people, this is a lifestyle choice. And so, are you gaining compliance? Which is, most officers don't want to sit there and write a report about prohibited camping, especially knowing that it really isn't going to, if we can gain compliance, verbally, great. Then you can look at someone's previous history. If it's an individual who has shown a pattern and practice of engaging in whatever the behavior is, whether it's prohibited camping or consumption on unlicensed premise or theft or, what shoplifting, you make some basis for determination based on their previous history. Have they gotten caught with doing this same thing before? So these are all factors. It ultimately does come down to discretion, to workload. Sometimes it's not too busy, and so we can get to these. Sometimes we're getting slammed with higher priority calls, and so we aren't able to. So there's a lot of variables and factors. I agree with Will. Disparate treatment will get us into a lot of trouble. It's all or nothing in my mind. Now, when you leave it to the discretion, then an officer can make some reasonable determination based on compliance, based on previous history, based on it being generated by a community member as opposed to an officer viewing it. So those are kind of all factors that go into that.
Yeah, I see the disparate enforcement problem, but on the other hand, I see, if you give this guy his 23rd citation, what good does that do?
It's ceremonial.
Yeah, right. It just adds up, and it has no effect, has no impact. I guess the question I have for you, Silver, is so what do you do instead? I mean, what you kind of said was, let's repeal the no camping law almost. If you're not going to enforce it or give citations and you can't enforce it in different circumstances, different ways, then just having a blanket policy that says you can't give any citations is basically, or a lot of people would consider that a repeal of the no camping ordinance.
Yeah, and in that case, I mean, like.
And it's free for all, and
if I'm
cats will be
able to
sleeping with
respond.
dogs, and that's.
No, yeah, I know. And it's never really a good, it's sort of a slippery slope, right? So I'm not saying that, that we repeal the camping law. I'm saying that the citations aren't working. And I'm saying that there was a space that was determined to be a place for these campsites, and that place was taken away. And I was one of the only people probably in this room, if not in this like whole area, that were a part of the conversation with the chief of police, with with Captain Camcar at the time, and with a few people from the Occupy movement that were selected to have a discussion about where we were going to be. And that was a lengthy process. I mean, there were a lot of people that were involved in the Occupy situation, and there was going to be a huge impact. And some of the places that we were thinking of being were, no, that's too high, traffic area, or no, that's going to be a place that's going to affect residences. So the one place that most of us said we didn't want to be, Washington Jefferson Park, ended up being the place where it ended up being, and we all know what happened with that. Bad situation. Don't want something like that to happen again. But we came to a term of where we were going to be. And that recently happened, and that was taken away. And now these people are left again, and we're cleaning up after the same mess over and over again. And the citations aren't working. And it doesn't add to the conversation. It's just some other little point of it. But we got to do something. And it seems like everything that we've tried is not working. And so I know that the people that are being impacted by this situation are really being impacted. And I don't want to see, people lose hope, feeling like they're not going to be able to get ahead, feeling that like they're not going to be able to pull themselves out of these situations, and ending up in a situation like this, where they're living on the side of a river. And that's eventually where they go. That's where my mother ended up. You end up going from being a person who's living in your vehicle to living on the streets, to addicted to drugs and living on a campsite. And for what? Because we can't find a place to kind of have them be?
Yeah, I guess the follow-on question is, so if we said no more citations, what do we do then? I mean, the obvious answer is then we solve the problem. But what's that look like? So it's a kind of, I'm reluctant to go to no citations without Plan B.
Right.
So,
It's a question directed to me. So
yeah, I think we're going beyond where we need to go tonight with that specific. That's something if we really want to look at a citation, or as Lieutenant Mason suggested, is there some sort of criteria we want to look at to how we do citations? That I think that we can then have that conversation. So with that, I have Sean, Will, and then Jennifer in the queue.
I have two questions that I'd like answered for our ongoing discussion. The first one is just, what can we do for some sort of citation forgiveness program? Is that in our realm? Is that outside of our realm? Is that something we can do with policy, or something that's beyond us? And the second question is, what can we do within policy to add more teeth to our toolbox? How can we encourage compliance with our officers on the street and increase communication between them and the homeless community.
Okay, on the first one, I think that's probably going beyond our scope of what we can actually affect, because that would take you into the criminal justice system, which would be beyond what we could do. At some point, maybe we could have a letter that goes to this council or city manager that says, would you look at this as possibly an answer to something like this? But that would be about as far as we could go on that. And then on your
Community outreach. I was gonna say the, kind of a sub-answer to his is the extension or expansion of the court team that works solely downtown. Is that could be expanded to include, different offenses or areas of town.
And is that within police commission purview, or is that also outside of it?
That would have to be.
I'd have to look
You can
at
make a
that. I don't
recommendation.
know if that's something, because we don't look at telling the police department how to staff and what teams to have and things like that, so. But
Well,
we would,
and court CORT is multi-jurisdictional, it's not just the police.
so. And I'm sorry, your second question, Sean? I was trying to write it on.
The first one was.
More teeth. to
Yeah,
result
the
in
first one was,
compliance.
what can we do for citation forgiveness? Maybe have pending citations that they can work off through volunteer work or through treatment programs to help address the drug issue. And then the second question is, what can we do to increase the tools in our police officers' ability to both communicate and enforce really norms throughout the community, whether they're laws specifically or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure, we'll have to do some research on that. I mean, if teeth is what you're looking for, that moves it into the next realm of the legislative,
Well,
to do something different there.
I think our policies are probably a little bit more restrictive than the laws are, and what police officers can and can't do.
Are you referring to the changes I was talking to about the enforcement of prison camping without having to provide the notices and whatnot?
Yeah, kind of. I don't really.
That's a policy change that I'm already looking at, but of course you guys would get.
I imagine there's
We
some
get
of those
that at
as
some
well.
point. too,
Right.
so. Okay, yeah, no, I got those. Okay. I have Will and then Jennifer.
So I acknowledge that a lot of times the giving citations to homeless people is an idle exercise, a ceremony only. But I want to speak in behalf of the value of the ceremony. From the point of view of community, not from the point of view of the homeless people, but from the community at large. These laws are important. And the ability of police officers to give citations is important. And I just don't want to lose sight of that as well. That's all.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I was gonna basically say what Bill said. I think it looks like there's some value in looking at the policy and how that discretion piece that you're talking about, how you feel like you could use a little more feedback about what you're supposed to do. And I think that'd be great if we could weigh in on that and kind of help with that discussion. I actually really like your idea about extending the trespass rights. I think that could be really useful to folks who feel like that's their property anyway, and if they find out it's not. But in a large case, I really agree with Silver. I feel like the ceremony isn't worth it. And the answer to what do we do if we don't citations is, well, that's kind of what we're doing now. It's completely ineffectual, and I don't like police wasting their time doing things that is just causing more conflict in our community when we could be spending our time and efforts on things that are actually making solutions. But I did want to comment, and this is slightly off topic, that we should not get too much in despair. We are at a threshold right now where we are working on getting more funding for our social services and our police department, and we just got the TAC report. I know it's like a time where everyone feels so frustrated to just do something, but we really are doing things. And I think, we need to remember that and put value on the successes that we are having, and that we're going to be making progress as we all stick together and are committed, and I think we are. So that's my cheerleader moment for today.
Thank you.
Thank you for the good, don't give up
Yeah.
hope.
That's right.
So we have about 15 minutes, and I was hoping that maybe, I know, we could at least kind of start the conversation, but can we talk a little bit about how the car camping
yes.
difference is a little different? I know this is everyone's favorite topic because there's a lot of, but maybe just the highlights, because we don't have a lot of time, but just sort of the highlights about, you know, the how we have this contract with this other group that is supposed to do certain things.
Right.
And then it comes back to the department and where the department fits in in the beginning of that and then the end of that, and what are some of the things that maybe we need to look at? Because at one of these meetings, I want to dive into the contract and talk about that and how that, you know, how that's set up and designed. So if we could do that, that would be great.
All right, I inherited the monster. Kyle Williams, I think, really formulated some of this structure that I'm working with now, and Chuck Salisbury had a good hand in it too. So the car camping, it's still a prohibited camping thing, but it's also tied to traffic code, storage of vehicle on a street. So how, again, the complaints come in to our comm center. Our comm center closes the complaint, routes it in a daily report to St. Vincent de Paul, who is our contractee, and a multitude of other people within the city. So PDD gets it, parking services, I get it, code enforcement, whatnot. So everybody kind of gets a look at it to see where the complaints are being complained about. And from there, by policy, we can't do anything with those complaints until St. Vincent has had an opportunity to do their part of the contract. And so and just remember that this contract is managed by the city with St. Vinny's. It includes us, the PD, in the aspect of, we have the enforcement aspect of it and a small reporting piece. But we don't manage it, although lately I have been, sort of, because it's causing issues for me. So St. Vinny's by contract has 2 days to reach out, attempt to make contact with any of the folks or the vehicles that are referenced in the complaint. And they get basically the entire CAD detail. So the person calls in and says, this vehicle, yada, 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 is parked at this location and whatever. So they get a license plate description. St. Vincent has 2 days to send their employee out to attempt to make contact, provide the social service packet is what they give. It was created by actually a few of our officers, and allow that person, if they're able to make contact, to leave. If they're actually provided the packet and their name and information is gathered, St. Vincent is supposed to put it in.
Okay, can I just interrupt you real quick? The packet that Lieutenant Mason's talking about is the one that is in your, was in your mailing that went out, that starts with the two.
Page 36.
Yeah, and then all those pages behind it is what this whole packet is, the social services, and all. Just so everybody had a frame of reference about what is supposed to go out.
Right. I've since taken a few pages out of this. We took out the Portland references, and I took out the Human Rights Commission packet. So we provide community resources, specific examples of what the ordinance states, definitions, and our local social services, and information about front door access, coordinated entry. So once St. Vincent makes their attempts to contact, then they are required to put the information into the spreadsheet, and by the contract, it says notify EPD of those vehicles that they weren't able to make contact with, so that we can follow up. And that's kind of where the sticking point has been for us, in that when I took over the program, all of the information wasn't necessarily being included in the spreadsheet, and I didn't know what the heck the definitions meant. I've got attempt to contact with a number with no conclusion. I had back to EPD, I had willful, or GOA, gone, unable to contact. So what I was told was that if it said back to EPD or willful, it meant that they weren't able to contact the person camping or associated with the vehicle, and that it was then up to us to attempt to make contact or process the vehicle for impound. If it said attempt, I just assumed that they were doing whatever they were doing. But I found out in actuality, they weren't doing anything, and they hadn't referred it back to us. So that kind of created some issues. And then willful meant that that person had been contacted and given a social service packet and advised that they needed to move within 24 hours. And then that, if they were contacted again anywhere within the city camping in that vehicle, they could be impounded because of willful violation. So that's kind of how St. Vinny's does their thing. And I've had a couple of meetings with them, so I can clarify that. So then it comes back to us, it's up to we had a few officers who had access to the spreadsheet, who would go in when they had time, and they would look for the back to EPDs or the willfuls, and they would go out and they would look for these vehicles and take action if they could find them. And that would sometimes mean impounding the vehicle and providing citations, or sometimes they allowed them the opportunity to leave the area. And actually, if you guys would like to pass these around, I have our current stats on prohibited camping and, sorry, I can grab one of those, and related tows from the first quarter of this year as compared to last year. Let's see, I'm trying to think of this in a nutshell. So the process for us taking action is really painful, because we're using parking enforcement aspects, the 5.135, which is storage of a vehicle on the street. That's what allows us to impound a vehicle if it hasn't been moved within 72 hours. And then at the same time, if we can show that they have erected a campsite, which most of the time a camper in itself equates to a campsite because they're bedding, personal property, cooking elements and whatnot, and a structure, then we can also cite for prohibited camping. And they can actually be arrested for prohibited camping, which is kind of ironic, because you can't if they're in a tent, but you can if they're in a car, because there's a clause in our ordinance that allows for willfulness. And that just says that if you're warned or cited for prohibited camping in a vehicle and you're contacted again for the same offense within that 30 days inside the city, you're willful. And that willful is arrestable offense. So some of the difficulties with the process was that St. Vincent was anywhere from 10 days to 2 weeks behind in reporting their contacts. Often I would open up the spreadsheet and it would be today, and we'd be back in March. And yet I had a complainant sitting in my blue team saying, you haven't done anything with this, and I'm really mad. And so when I get to looking at it, I'm like, oh, well, they haven't even put it on their log 2 weeks ago. So they were way behind in meeting their 2-day timeline. And then they weren't putting in some other data that they were supposed to report on. So I actually just recently met with the contract manager over there, and I asked about how we can kind of streamline this process so that they're able to meet their reporting requirements, and they're getting us the information in a more timely fashion. And actually, since we met, she made changes to the spreadsheet, and their employee has been pretty Johnny on the spot. So I'm not sure there's a lot of, as long as they keep doing what they're doing, I'm not sure there's a lot of work that needs to be done by this body. But that's it in a nutshell. What questions do you guys have?
Sean in the queue. So
You said by policy you can't contact them before St. Vincent does. You have to wait through this process.
Right.
Is that useful? Is that helpful? Would you prefer to contact them earlier?
No and yes. So yes, it's useful because it gives St. Vinny's, and this was a conversation we had with them. It's like the purpose of the contract is to allow the social service agency to reach out to these folks and offer resources in a non-enforcement, non-scary way to folks to say, hey, we're here, what can we offer you? We don't want you to get cited, yada, yada, yada. And in most cases, that's effective when they're able to make contact with somebody. They're able to get compliance and have folks move, or get them into a permitted parking space or a private area. And we would prefer that they did it. So it's not, literally our car camping log, again, is like our illegal camping. It's 5 to 10 calls a day about people camped. So yes.
have Silver.
So Alan is my council person. And where we are in the Amazon area, there are a large number of people that are parking overnight at the park, on the streets, and then for a large part of it, they're gone the next day. Their vehicles are actually in working order, they move. But there's also RVs, and RVs park all the time in my area. And you can see the residents that are there really affected by it. There's a lot of people that are like, I'm worried about it. There's a website called Nextdoor, and it's neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods will get in and say, hey, we have a new person in the area, be careful, it's sketchy, there's like people break-ins and stuff. They're more transient, I think, when they're in an RV or they're in a vehicle that's moving than they are, the people that are downtown, the people that are at the campsite. Not in vehicles. Not in vehicles, right. So I guess my question to you would be how does it, what is the process for us asking for them, the St. Vincent de Paul, to step up, to get more staff, or to get more, to be more active with their responses to people who are putting in these complaints? I'm not personally complaining. I just see that it's an issue in my neighborhood, and if it was up to me, hey, that's fine, But it's not up to me. So when somebody's there for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4, at 3 weeks, sometimes at a time,
Right.
How do we ask St. Vincent de Paul to sort of step up their action on that end?
So how you guys as a body asks is going to be through ultimately the city manager's office. So right now, PDD is the contract manager of this. They're the ones that are supposed to be communicating with St. Vincent to, are you meeting the elements of the contract? Are there changes that we need to make? And frankly, they're supposed to be overseeing the work that they're doing. I met with the city manager's office, who's going to be assuming, at least that's what I've been told, the contract in June. They're going to be renegotiating it. And they wanted to know specifically, what changes should we put in here? I mean, are these reporting criteria reasonable? Is the timeline reasonable? All of these things. So I think the input that you might want to have is going to be directed at the CMO's office. I don't know when they're going to be renegotiating it, but it expires in June, so it should be soon.
But there are specific areas that are set up for camping vehicles, right? Like Alton Baker was?
It's closing, but yeah,
Okay,
so actually, that's one of the things I learned. They have and we talked about that this contract covers kind of two elements for St. Vinny's. There's the permitted parking, camping on private and public. They're supposed to be managing all of that permitting and checking in and case management. And then there's the car camping piece where they're going out and making contact. And they've got one person doing all of this. And some office staff to assist. And so there's a little bit of concern that they don't have enough coverage to do all the work. And so they were considering splitting the contract and making them separate and having more accountability on both aspects of it. Because frankly, they pay the contract, but they don't know how many hours they're really getting for what they're paying. And so that I know there was some discussion about being more specific in there about that sort of thing.
Final piece, can we make a suggestion to open up other spaces, like overnight camping spaces?
They're always looking for more.
That's not, the problem is we've got a waiting list
Gotta
of
find more places.
hundreds of people waiting, and that people aren't stepping up to the plate and doing the spaces. There's like 80, 85
private.
car camping spots right now, and we're maxed out on where people will allow them to be. The real issue is getting more sites.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a big deal.
Okay.
You think we'd have a lot more, but we don't.
So when I look at this, so this is, as we talked in our first half of the discussion about having something that's not the police going out and trying to help people. This is the perfect example of where an idea that should work, that should be helpful, has not been. It hasn't worked because in my full opinion is the wrong people are managing this contract. The people that have to deal with the complaints, the ones that have to answer the questions, are not the ones that can control how much St. Vinny's does this. And this is a little reason that I wanted to bring this, because I think we need to have this discussion about that, where should this contract? Because I think this is a great service. I think if it actually was done right, and it had the resources and it had the oversight, that this could be helpful to help get this program, because it would be better to have a social service person to go out, knock on the door of an RV or in a car and go, you can't camp here, you need to move, but can we help you? Why are you here? Is there something we can move? And so this is the example, and I don't want to go on my soapbox, but this is a perfect example of where this should work, and it should be better, and it should help the department manage a problem that they're getting all the complaints about. I mean, you said, then it goes to the city, to the police auditor and says, police aren't doing their job. I keep calling them, they won't do this. But the contract, and if you guys, between the next meetings, you need to read the contract, because it says in there that they have to try to knock and physically see the person to give them this notice, or it doesn't count that they were contacted. And it's the same thing with the police, or have that same sort of, they have to just put the thing on the car.
Well, they are doing that now.
Are they? Okay,
They're
because
now-
that was for the longest
They're now
time.
taking it to the door, but it doesn't count as,
As a contact.
right, as now I can enforce a willfulness, because we don't know who got it, who took
Right.
it off. We can't say that. The owner did.
So I just think that's something that I think we need to look at that. And then, yes, this is one of those things that, yes, maybe we go back and we talk to, send something, communication to the city managers, or to the city council saying that, this is just being managed, this part of the program is being managed in the law department.
Because it's in PDD, not in EPD.
Right, because, and Lieutenant Mason's is saying is, that nobody's even asking them who's checking to make sure they're sending this spreadsheet to them. But if the department was managing it, then they would say, we haven't seen that spreadsheet in a week. What's going on? Why hasn't this been updated? Because,
Right.
so that's where I think that, this is one of those things that I think there's a program here, if it's managed right, I think it could be what we're sort of looking, as our answer to take the heat off of, that the department's not doing their job when they are, but it's just, there's a big
Yeah.
hole.
Ultimately, I would, I guess, maybe kind of a first blush at it, I would like to throw a dart and say that our right-of-way camping should be handled the same way. But again, we gotta have people that can go out and have these conversations and offer these resources, because I can say, well, there's Camp 99 and there's usually beds available, but if somebody associated with the places where homeless can go to start getting into shelter, or reaching out and making those contacts and drawing them in, then it'd save us a lot of time from being the bad guys, and put it probably where it really needs to be. But
So it would be nice if we could say, look, this program works. If we just had more money, we could make this next program work, so.
yeah, and I think too, the other piece, even with the car camping, is that there's not enough space for all the people that are camping in their cars. There just aren't. I mean, I chase, quote unquote, the same people around in the tents and in the cars. And it's like, we're faced with the dilemma of, do I take somebody's house and make them now a tent camper, and then eventually, in the bushes? It's a moral, ethical dilemma for us every day. And then there's the cost of the destruction of the motorhomes if they don't recover them.
And they usually can't afford to recover them.
Right.
Right.
It would cost more to destroy them.
Okay, so if we don't have any, because we're a little over time, so if we don't have any other direct questions for Lieutenant Mason or any other comments, so I wrote down a lot of notes, and so at our next agenda planning meeting, we'll start to work with, how we can find some of these other things and maybe bring back and maybe have more, even bring St. Vinny's in here to talk about how they do the contract and how they make their contacts, and so that we can get how they're doing that and do something different that needs to be done. So,
Can I
okay?
just interject real quick? Somebody
Yeah,
slid
sure.
this over to me.
That was under the.
That was in the pile of
Oh.
these.
I don't
That
even
was
know how
the
it got
last
on
2
my-
pages.
Oh, it came off the
Off the
front.
copier.
Okay. Is that- what the heck is this? Never mind, disregard. Thank
The
you.
answers to the test.
And I'm happy to follow up and answer any questions if you route them to Jeremy or whatever.
Okay, great.
That's what I do all day, so thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant.
And I
Thank
want
you
to
for
say
your
that
time.
the captain has been very responsive to my questions. I mean, I kind of threw him under the bus saying, I've asked a question. And he's given me the same answers that he's given you about the discretion and kind of the escalating process, so
Thank you for what you do.
you're welcome.
Thank you. So with that, we'll move on to the chief report. Captain Klico?
Excellent. All right. I am sitting in again tonight for the chief. He is over at the Oregon Association Chiefs of Police Conference in Bend with the new deputy chief, Stacy Jepson. So last time I was here, I talked about how they had made a selection, and Stacy is now on board. She's finishing up week 2. What I can say, I haven't had a chance to interact with her this week, but I spent a fair amount of time with her last week, and my first impressions are really positive. I think she's going to be a great addition to EPD, and I say that primarily because she did a lot of listening that first week, and that's usually a good sign. So kudos on that hire. I talked about the officers we were going to be hiring. We have, when all said done, all the dust settled, we're going to be hiring 16 officers. 3 of them are lateral officers, 2 from Lane County, and I forget where the 3rd one is from. And they will be starting on April 19th, and then the following Monday, the 22nd, the other 13. That will literally take us to a +4 overhire situation for sworn officers, so that's from chief on down to these brand new baby cops. But of course, we have 4 pending retirements. So by the end of June, we are going to be fully staffed. That's going to give us just under 40 individuals in one form of training or another. We're starting to see some relief. We've had 3 of our officers, what we call cut loose. They are in solo status and have been plugged in to fill some of the holes in patrol. So that's great news. Criminal Justice Initiative, I know council had a work session on this on Monday, and from what the chief told me, and this is the initiative to try and get some additional funding for not only the police department, but social service, the fire department. It's a full, broad spectrum criminal justice initiative, and I understand that the city manager is supposed to be coming back to council in about a month's time with some possible suggestions for ordinance language. So that is still moving forward through the process. So that's really good news. And then really lastly, just want to thank each of you for the work that you guys are doing. This is the 3rd opportunity I've had to sit in for the chief in the last few months, and it's been eye-opening and really informative to watch the process. So really appreciative for the work you guys do. Any questions?
Anybody have any questions for the captain? The street crimes team, I see. is
Thank you. I
up
skipped
and-
right over street
up-
crimes team, and that's what all this is about.
Up and running and doing a lot of work out there.
Yes, thank you.
Finding cash everywhere.
Yes, so you guys are probably seeing some of the news releases. The team has been incredibly effective so far, even though it's only at half strength. We have Lieutenant Vinci, who's sort of running the team, standing it up. We have Sergeant Ware, and then we have 4 officers. And we are, as we start getting some of these other officers cut loose, going to be able to, hopefully in the June time frame. There are a lot of competing interests. We have some retirements coming up. We have a promotional process underway. We have some additional upcoming promotional processes for sergeant and lieutenant, and then the retirements I talked about. But I wanted to real quickly talk about some of the highlights that I gleaned from some of the news releases. Like I said, you may all have seen this. Street Crimes assisted the patrol division through different means. They were able to seize over $40,000 in cash that is suspected drug money. They haven't made any arrests on that yet, but the investigation is ongoing, and we were able to to utilize the resources from Albany PD. They actually sent one of their drug dogs down to assist us. And through a spirit of cooperation, we're able to glean enough evidence to be able to seize that money and further that investigation. So hopefully we'll have some additional information. So much of the drug trade doesn't obviously, well, so much of crime in particular, doesn't stay within one jurisdiction. So when you have these working relationships with surrounding jurisdictions, it really can help further those investigations. Street crimes received information from the property crimes unit and crime analysis units about an individual who had listed a bench grinder on Craigslist from a recent Lane County burglary. And this is where a unit like this has the opportunity and the time to be able to go and conduct a sting. So they did that. They did what they call a buy bust. They made an arrangement, purporting to be somebody who was interested in buying this grinder. Individual showed up. They were able to take him into custody. He was armed at the time with a loaded firearm, so he was a felon. They were able to take that from him. They also were then later, through consent, to go back and search his apartment, and they found a number of other items of stolen property at his apartment. And these are the kind of investigations that we know, or the type of crimes that we know are going on each and every day, Craigslist and other sites, to be able to sell secondhand property. And it's been a capacity issue. They don't quite reach the threshold for our investigations division unless it's a really high ticket item. Patrol to be able to get individuals into plain clothes or to get them positioned, and the training isn't necessarily present. But very quick order, we've got an offender and they've recovered a bunch of stolen property. Another individual here, this is one where they were able to assist patrol. We had a call on the screen that had been sitting for quite some period of time, but there were no officers available. It was just a suspicious subject call. They contacted some individuals who were allegedly squatting in a house over on Villard. They were seen, taking apart vehicles, those kind of things that people are like, well, that doesn't really look right. But without additional information, patrol officers are responding to higher level priority calls. So we're able to send street crimes over there. They contacted these individuals, one who had a confirmed warrant for theft in the first degree. They also were able to recover quite a large sum of methamphetamine off one of the individuals. Another instance where they assisted the Oregon State Police in locating a person of interest from a recent homicide in the Roseburg area. Here where they partnered with the Special Investigations Unit to conduct online sexual corruption of minor cases, as well as some prostitution stings. I think there was some publicity that came out on that you guys might have seen. One of the things that is really prevalent in this country that kind of goes on underneath the radar are human trafficking and sex trafficking. And those are difficult enough investigations that if you're a patrol officer and you get dispatched to it, you really don't have the means, the resource, or the experience to be able to really fully investigate that. But a team like this is ideally situated to be able to either conduct these investigations by themselves or augment our investigators. Because it takes a lot of resources. You have to conduct these types of operations safely. You've got to have people in position so that the officers are safe while they're conducting these investigations. Another instance of working with the U.S. Marshal's Office, where we located an individual who was a fugitive justice who had a nationwide extradition warrant for an aggravated assault out of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So it's another instance of being able to partner with both our federal, our state, and other local law enforcement agencies. Here's another instance of officers seeing what they perceived as hand-to-hand interaction or possible drug activity on 6th Avenue. One vehicle took off, went the wrong way on a street. They made a traffic stop. During the traffic stop, officers requested an Oregon State Police drug detection dog respond. Again, another example of the partnership. This led to the seizure of more than 72 grams of methamphetamine, as well as some user quantities of heroin and more than $6,000 in cash. And these are the types of things that when you're running from call to call as a patrol officer, You might see them, but you maybe don't have the time to fully investigate them, or maybe the experience to kind of see what recognize what you're seeing and be able to take the proper investigative steps. So this team has hit the ground running and is doing a lot of great work.
Anybody have any questions?
It's impressive.
Yes.
The news had a piece about a home that there was a lot of traffic and there was can you tell me a little bit more about what happened then?
So this is a home up on Walona Street. I'm sure you're pretty familiar with it. It was actually so Patrol had been working this property, and so I want to make sure that Patrol gets a lot of the credit. But it's an example of the type of work that street crimes will be able to do. This was a owner-occupied home that was going into foreclosure. It was a individual who was suffering, and I met with her several times trying to see if we could resolve the situation. But it's a situation that kind of goes on throughout the city. You get an individual who either has substance abuse problems, potentially some mental health issues, and as that person is kind of struggling to make their way, they sort of become victimized by the criminal element because they're always looking for a place to flop, a place where it can be home base for them. This person actually had some individuals who got into this house and were staying there. We were trying to work with a number of different entities. Literally, we had a meeting with her estranged husband, whose name is still on the home. We met in this very room here, trying to come up with some ways that we could help get this person her help, because she was her health was deteriorating because of the drug use, because of the living condition she was in. She didn't have a phone. She didn't have any means to get around. I literally I worked Christmas Day and I went out to her house to try and get the lay of the land. So I was like, she had no food. I went out and bought her some lunch because she literally had no means to support herself, and yet she had all these individuals, and if you go into the house, you knock on their bedroom door, they wouldn't answer the door, they wouldn't come out. So what this team was really able to do was sort of the culmination of the whole event, but eventually their power got shut off and their water because nobody was paying the bills. And so working with code enforcement, we were able to go out there. Several of the individuals that were in the house had warrants for their arrest. We were able to get them out. Code enforcement closed the house down. We literally boarded it up. The individual herself had warrants, but it wasn't over there. Once we got this house secured, which had been a bane in the neighborhood for well over a year, we were able to then reach out to this individual after the fact and work with her to try and get her into some kind of, she really needed to get back into a rehabilitation center. She had gotten to the point where she had actually gotten MRSA in her eye. That was the type of lifestyle she was living. We had an instance when we were over there one time where one of the individuals literally got underneath the house and was trying to hide and then got stuck. We had to have the fire department come in and cut a hole in the floor to try and extract her because she was trying to get away. People were using, it looked like a deer path. They were walking into the on-ramp to westbound Beltline from Coburg Road, and then they would cut over that berm into their backyard, and they were jumping in and out of windows. And there was a lot of drug activity going on there. There was a lot of stolen property that was being fenced through there. And the neighbors were frustrated and they were fed up. And it's just an example. It seems like a simple problem, and there are some tools at the disposal, things like abatement, but you can arrest these folks over and over and over, and with the revolving door justice system, they come right back. So it was an example again of a team like this that has the opportunity to really dedicate the time and not be a patrol officer who's trying to get over there while they're shagging calls in other parts of the district.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you. So our next agenda item is the cell phone procedure review. And so Lieutenant San Miguel has joined us to answer any questions because Kyle cannot make it here tonight on the policy. But if you read the summary, Kyle kind of explains the changes that he did after our discussion. He even met with the police auditor, Mark Gisner, to kind of talk about the allegation that was brought up about, and where that was actually going to be classified under standards, duties, and conduct for the use of that cell phone. So with that, does anybody have any further comment or questions or suggestions on this this policy? Dave?
Yeah, well, so it's better. I mean, I like it better than the one we looked at last month. And I see it's limited specifically to department-issued cell phones. One of the issues that I raised last month was there are personal cell phones that are being used for work purposes that they get paid a stipend for that's not addressed by this policy. There also is, everybody has a personal cell phone, and those are being used on work time as well for, like the case we looked at, one of the cases, Snapchat, for example, and social media. Still, I'm wondering if there's going to be like some effort to look at a separate policy that addresses like social media, because that's not going away. I mean, it's more prevalent every day. And personal cell phones, because this, as a policy regarding department-issued cell phones, seems pretty reasonable to me, but there's a big gap that's not addressed by this policy. So I think it's an opportunity to address kind of practices, because social media and the use thereof is not going to slow down, so it's an opportunity to get in front of it, and there's no real guidance on it, not in this policy.
So I think that's what Kyle is sort of talking about in his summary here, is that those things are in policy 103, the standards, duties, and conduct of them. And that's the place I think it's supposed to be. And Lieutenant, if you want to join us at the table, and if you have any comments about it, that would be great, or what your thoughts are on it.
So a social media policy is on Kyle's to-do list in the near future. We do need to come up with a social media policy. In regard to the personal cell phones, because they're their personal property, we can't necessarily dictate how they use them outside of the conduct policy. They can't do anything with them that would violate the other policies we have under our code of conduct.
So along those lines about personal phones that they're getting stipends on, how do we address like public records concern? How is that addressed? Is that in 103? I don't have 103 handy, so I don't know that it's fully on point. It's probably strained interpretation that you apply to personal use of a cell phone, but I'll look at 103. But what about the public records implication of using a personal cell phone that the department is paying for?
Well,
how's that handled?
It could become public record. I mean, there could be a request put in for all your communications regarding a case or whatever. With most of our stipends are $20 a month or $30 a month is what you get for a cell phone. Most of you know that the price of a cell phone with the data package is $80 to $100. So really the officers are paying the majority of the rate. It's just a portion of it that's being paid. So it's really still their property, and they have rights to privacy as well.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
if they're using that for public purposes, their right to privacy.
Exactly.
It's gotta be.
And I
they're
honestly,
giving that up. Right?
Honestly, I don't know what the answer is as to how much of their communication would be public record. My assumption is that if they were using it during the course of a case or taking photographs for evidence, those sort of things. But if, they're communicating with their family or those sort of things, it's going to be private. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Well,
Captain.
It's a valid question. I have my personal cell phone and I use it for work. I know the courts weigh in to a certain degree. So we had a case a few years ago where it was requested via the defense that an officer's cell phone, his personal cell phone, through discovery, they wanted access to that. and the courts made a determination. Essentially, they went through and they reviewed his cell phone, and then they redacted things that they felt were outside the purview or that weren't relevant to this particular case. So to a certain degree, an officer who uses a personal cell phone is at risk for potentially having some of their personal stuff released if a court makes a determination. Now, if you had an individual who came in off the street and went through a public records request, wanted to see Officer A's cell phone communications regarding a particular time frame that involved a case that they had some stake in, a determination would have to be made about what was appropriate to release and what was appropriate to redact. And I am not, it's really kind of a city attorney question, I think, in terms of where the out of bounds markers are for that kind of stuff.
I have Sean in the queue.
I think it's a really valid concern, and perhaps there's room to warn the officers in this policy, or if there's a receiving a stipend policy, that their stuff might be discoverable. But as the policy stands for department-issued cell phones, I think this is good. Maybe meriting that one small addendum.
So, I mean, it does say under A that they should be aware that the cell phones may create a public record. So, I mean,
Yeah, apartment issued cell phone.
right. But, I think it goes on any communication that, could become a public, just like ours here, we have to be, ours are public records too, even though we're using our own email address or something, so. But, I guess in the code of conduct, I guess they do talk about, some of that, your personal use of things here on the,
Correct.
Yeah.
And you can't do things on your personal cell phone, as we discovered with the recent case we have, that are outside of the code of conduct policy. Because if you're doing it while on duty, even though it's your personal cell phone, it's still problematic. And for the most part, all of our patrol officers, the patrol division, they all have department-issued cell phones. It's very few people who still get the stipend, and it's mostly managers.
Captains, people like that.
Captains, lieutenants, a few sergeants, yeah. But for the day-to-day patrol officers out there handling calls and using their phones, for body camera stuff and for taking photographs, that's all department-issued cell phones.
And a big part of this, because there's an expectation that I'm going to answer my phone pretty much 24/7, and so either I have to carry two phones around and issue potentially two phone numbers, or keep one phone. Whereas a patrol officer, when they go home at the end of the day, there is less of an expectation that they're going to be reachable. Not that they couldn't be reached, but there's less of an expectation for that.
Moving for approval be in order.
So that's, if nobody has any other discussions or questions, I would take a motion to approve this
So
policy.
moved.
I'll second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Perfect, thank you so much. I'm happy to move that off of his list. So we're down to community outreach. So since Scott's not here, is everybody still trying to make some outreach calls? I know Jennifer had asked us to fill in for her on one the other day, and I'm not sure if we got that.
April 25th, yeah. It's the Cali Young Neighborhood Association. I'll be at a conference for my other job. And they, apparently, the Chief Skinner will be at their meeting, and they were wondering if, they've had the auditor and the Civilian Review Board come already, apparently, last year, but they haven't heard from the Police Commission. And so if anyone was available, they thought it would be a good to piggyback it with the chief, but if no one's available, it's not the, also, it's not the end of the world, but.
Okay, I'll see if I can. I'll check my calendar again, see if I can.
Yeah, and it's, I think it's in here, Sheldon Community Center.
Yeah. Okay.
Cal Young.
Yeah, Cal Young.
What
I
day did you
have
say?
an ad on
25th.
next Wednesday, the 17th. I'll be meeting with, well, the Western University neighborhood is defunct, but the Pearl District area around the around the Whitebird Clinic meets on a regular basis about the issues there, and I'll be meeting with them. And I asked if Christy Hammett and the chief could be there, but the chief's going to be out of town, so she's going to see if somebody else can be there, and potentially Doug Mozan, who works with those folks on a regular basis, might come to that meeting.
And where's that meeting at on the 17th? Do you know?
Yes.
Jeremy, would you try to find out?
Oh, that's cool.
Send
At
that
the
out.
Yeah, I know where it
community
is.
center.
Mailing.
Sharing
I
community.
If
think it's-
anybody wants to attend, that might be a good one to attend, because we do.
It kind of depends on,
Up from that.
they
Okay.
meet in different rooms, so you kind of just.
I can tell you.
Right.
Okay, with that, any other questions about outreach or comments about outreach?
And I can do the Cal Young. I have a
Okay.
friend who just moved into that neighborhood, and she's never been to the meeting, so I will drag her with me.
There you go.
It's at the new
Do
Whitebird
they need
Clinic, dental
us to let them
clinic,
know that we'll have somebody there? Jeff?
I know the chair, so I will let him know.
Purple.
7?
15.
7 is when it
Usually.
starts, yeah.
Okay.
1415 Pearl,
14.
the new dental clinic for Whitebird.
Thanks.
So with that, we might actually end a little bit early tonight.
What?
So we'll go around and do commissioner comments. We'll start with you, Alan, if you don't mind, and go that way for the end.
I was just gonna comment on the meeting that I'm having on Wednesday, but I just did, so.
Okay, perfect. Silver?
No comment.
Okay. Sean?
I was hoping to use his time talking to make my to put my thoughts together, so no comment right now.
Steve?
Well, I would just say that the unhoused issue is a complex community issue that requires a community solution. That should really try to strike some reasonable balance between what might be seen as competing interests, which would be the unhoused home and business owners alike. And really, just can't pick one faction at the expense of the other. And it's not easy nor overnight, but with the inclusive effort from the entire community, we can move that iceberg in time. But it's a long game. That's my only thought about that.
Terry?
No, not anything tonight.
Jennifer?
I already talked about Cal Young, so.
Okay. Will?
Nothing, thank you.
Captain, any last words?
No, thank you for having me.
Well, thanks, everyone. I appreciate everybody coming tonight. I appreciate the discussion on the topic of the police department and homelessness. And so we'll look at doing that. The other thing I will remind everybody, next month, the May meeting is on the 4th, and it's on a Saturday. It's our planning meeting, so it's
Oh, right.
very important for us to set up what topics and what things we're going to talk about for the next 2 years. That's what we try to plan for. It's 2 years at a time. So, so if everybody can make sure that's on your calendars, and we start at 9.
It's up to you. 9 is perfect.
Do we have a location now?
Yeah, what was the
Oh,
location?
yeah, we don't have a
Yeah.
location.
Yeah,
It was TBD.
We do.
Yeah, we do.
Oh.
You guys want
Washington
the,
Park.
what's that?
Wasn't it Washington Park?
Yes.
Oh, Washington Park.
Washington.
My kids call it Washington
So,
Park.
the house that's
Cheese.
there.
Yeah.
One of the structures is yellow with.
Does it
big
have a
holes in
name?
When they were little,
It-
Yeah.
cheese park.
Does, and I'm embarrassed to say that I forgot the name.
It is
It's the cheese park.
I'll make sure it's in the next,
Okay.
Washington
the
Park.
mailing that goes out
Washington
tomorrow.
Park House.
So close to Cinco de Mayo,
What's that?
so
So-
close to Cinco de Mayo, so.
Margaritas at night. When we're
I don't think I
finished.
can do that
Before the meeting
Do
starts.
nachos.
Nachos.
Well, you're
Can we
gonna
vote
provide
on that?
lunch,
Yeah.
so lunch should be.
Yeah.
You guys have any,
I'm a single issue margarita.
Beef burritos.
you guys have any
Okay.
recommendations?
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate
Sean
everybody.
is pro margarita.
When they say they arrest
I don't drink very
someone,
much.
what is it the actually you're doing?
Yeah,
Like when they.
So, you know, I looked at
Good
that.
to know.
yeah.
Yeah, right.
This is a rest.
Bit of a mystery other dietary considerations.
I'm thinking they're talking
I
about
said guineas, but
onto something.
No?
yeah.
I mean, pro eating,
I like to eat.
Link to that.
not super picky.
Good, good.
Hey,
Okay.
Bill.
Like mucho gusto.
Yeah, I was reading on your shoulder there.
I'm thinking he's a good
Mexican food is actually really very,
Yes, our citizen.
The reason there's
by and large, very friendly to doing
we
that.
issue a citation
Yes,
for an offense, even if it's not necessarily criminal, to give someone a citation that, not a traffic violation, but another type of violation, prohibited camping.
Yeah, I think.
All right.